Hello and welcome back to the Security Conversations podcast. My guest for this conversation needs no introduction. The OG Apple O-Day guy, the OG car hacker, the OG whatever. Charlie Miller, welcome to the show. How are you?
Great. I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
Why did it take so long for you to come on the show? I feel like this is way overdue.
Yeah, I listen to your podcast, believe it or not. And I've wanted to come on for a while, but, it finally worked out. So hopefully it'll be good.
Thank you. You're a security engineer at Cruise working on securing driverless cars, working on automation there. But before we get into all of that, I want to get into the car hacking scene and your thoughts on where we are. But since I have you on the podcast, we got to spend some time going through your life and career.
Okay.
You were a math guy out of high school. How did you end up at the NSA? Were you recruited out of high school or out of some of those programs like Vinny and Chris Eng and some of those guys?
No, I was not a very good high school student. So I went to college like everyone else. I majored in math, went to grad school at Notre Dame, got a PhD. And then I had to decide if I wanted to basically teach math or do something else. And I didn't really want to teach math. So
what are we talking about? 2000s? Early 2000s?
Yeah. I graduated in 2000. So NSA was a chance to go do something else. So I went there. And while I was there, it was a pretty cool program. They taught me the trade and learned how to do computer stuff.
What can you talk about the trade? What can you talk about what you did there? Anything at all? I mean, you
not too much.
How long did you spend there?
I was there like 5 years. I basically took Dave Vitel's seat. So I was in, basically the same area as he was.
And both of you have the same answer, which is I can't tell you anything about what I did there, which is fine.
I mean, that stuff is so outdated. Anything I worked on is 20 years old, so no one cares anyway.
Got it. We got with the public, myself and security journalists and writers got introduced to you in 2007, I believe, through your paper. Let me get it right. The Legitimate Vulnerability Market Inside the Secretive World of O-Day Exploit Sales. 2007, seminal paper on that market and the existence of that market. Can you just go back and give me what was the motivation for writing it and what were you hoping to accomplish?
Yeah, I mean, for one thing, not a lot of journalists like yourself even covered that. It was like totally below the radar. But yeah, it was, at the time, people were, there was this, it's people know now that folks sell exploits. And
you had just left the NSA, right? This was around how long have you been?
2 years later, something. I left in 2005, okay. I think. So it had been a little bit of time. I had been doing some research and stuff. And I guess I just kept hearing people talk about, whether, are people selling exploits? Is this a thing? And, I wanted to kind of lay out as, that was my one shot at trying to be a journalist, I guess, was lay out the story as I knew it, if exploit sales were going on. I really took it from a researcher's perspective, like, why is selling exploits hard? Why would you want to do it? What are some problems you'll run into and that sort of thing. And I presented it at some economics conference. Right. So it's, it wasn't exactly like mainstream.
Right. But the motivation was to just kind of shine some light on the existence of this market and more specifically, just how complicated and complex it was to navigate it from the researcher's perspective, getting a good price, finding the right buyers, making sure it's not burned before it's sold and so on.
Yeah. It's tricky because it's like nuanced in the sense that it's not like you're selling a car where you can just get it back or whatever. Like what you're selling is basically a secret. And how do you prove that it's real without just giving it away? And where they're like, oh yeah, actually we didn't want that, but now we already have it, so we're not paying you. So it's just kind of interesting. I thought it was, at least from how do you try to navigate around that? And the short answer is it's just all trust based.
From then till now, and the question now is, we're at 2022. This stuff has become so normalized that we have companies, we have offensive exploit creation companies selling. There's mercenary conversations around mercenary groups and so on. It's become rather mainstream. When you look back at 2007 and what you were trying to raise and where we are today and where exploit sales are, what is your own take on how it's evolved?
I mean, almost all the research I did was, this and lots of other stuff we can talk about was like weird and interesting and no one knew it at the time. And now everyone knows it. So I don't know if that is because just time moved on or what, but like you said, there's $1 million companies and lots of people that we know probably work for them, and it's not a secret. It's just the way things work now. But back when I wrote the paper, no one really knew anything about it, and so I was just trying to shed some light on it, I guess.
Are you surprised with where we are today, with exploit sales being a big key part of the ecosystem, or were you expecting it to kind of stay under the radar all these years? Because there's a little bit of controversy to it. There's a lot of controversial takes around selling these things to governments for use against dissidents and some other like non credible targets. When you look at where exploit sales is today, were you expecting we'd be here?
I don't know if I really thought that hard about it, but no. I'm not that surprised in the sense that like exploits are always going to be useful to people, whether they're bad guys, good guys, governments, hackers, pen testers, whatever. And they've gotten progressively harder to make or write or discover. And, there's value in that. And so I guess I'm not surprised people try to make money off of, something that's hard to do.
How did you deal with some of the early controversy from your discussion of this? You remember Chris Shagoyan actually did a famous talk with your kitchen, photograph of your kitchen up there, and was very critical of you guys, suggesting that you were part of that section of the industry that was pushing exploits in the wrong places. Was that something that ever concerned you? Is that something you worried about navigating?
I mean, that particular individual never concerned me, but the idea.
No, in general.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, it was always more of a freedom of speech, kind of freedom of expression kind of topic, more than people hunting dissidents or something. So it was like, I found a vulnerability, and I can do what I want with that information, and it's up to companies to secure their products. It's not my job to do that. I'm just some guy. And so That's the way I always saw it. And so like I have the freedom to do what I want with this information was kind of, the way I saw it.
Right. And right after that, you became a thorn in Apple's side. Was that deliberate? Or was that just kind of headline hunting?
It wasn't related to that. It was, basically the trying to think the way I got started in that. So like, again, this is something that you won't believe now, but in the 2006 timeframe, there was a large group of people, like 80% of folks, and even in our industry, who didn't believe that you could have malware on a Mac. Like it just was not like it was impossible.
Apple was leading, but Apple was leading with that messages. I'm a Mac, you're a PC, PC's got the snippets and so on. So they led their entire marketing program around that.
I know, but anyone with any knowledge at all should have known it was bullshit. So a part of my mission was just to educate again, like, hey, it's a computer. It's going to run code if you give it to it, and there's, they didn't figure out a magic bullet to write perfect software, and there's going to be vulnerabilities. And so a lot of my early like research in Mac stuff, and that was like kind of the early pwn to own things was like, hey, look, exploits do work against Macs. And the really hilarious thing is that after the first year I won pwn to own, hacking a MacBook. Like,
you're going too fast because I want to go over the pwn to own years.
Let me just finish this. So like the comments in that, if you read like Slashdot or something back then, are all about how they thought I was just like lying or making it up. Like even after I showed that you could do it, people didn't want to believe that you could actually exploit a Mac. And so it's just bizarre. And then like the second year, it was like more people kind of believed it. And then at some point, then it was kind of common knowledge that, wow, they're not perfectly safe computers. Who knew?
Right. The first time was in 2008, after Dino had done it the previous year. In addition to educating people, there was some serious cash on display there. Your first win in 2008 was a $10,000 cash for a MacBook Air, includes the MacBook Air, the pwn-to-own component of it. What do you remember about that period of time? I believe it was a Safari bug you used. I remember correctly?
Yeah, they were all the pwn wins I did were Safari bugs.
Can you paint a picture for the audience about what cracking into a Mac looked like at that time compared to today, with those folks coming to pwn trying to get into a Mac?
Well, for one thing, they sure win a lot more money today than I did. So you mentioned there's a lot of money, $10K. I'm not going to
targets are harder though.
I mean, they make like $100K now.
But targets are harder. I mean, it's much, much more difficult than when you were. I mean, you admit that up front that like a lot of what you're seeing the kids doing it 1-to-1 today is incredible work, right?
I mean, for sure. I mean, and part of that is if you look, like I did some of those at least by myself, where now it's teams of 10 people doing it. And that's just like, and it's not that I'm worth 10 people. I'm definitely not. It's that it's just that much harder. But yeah, like back then, like I can't remember the details. It's been 15 years, but
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure they didn't have depth for sure. They might not have had ASLR. I don't remember the details, but it was certainly much easier.
Sandbox.
No, there was zero sandboxing. That was a big change that happened, of course. So it was easier for sure. But people weren't, I don't know if there weren't as many people in the field or what the deal was, but there wasn't, especially in 2008, there wasn't that much competition to people who knew how to hack into Macs.
Do you think your work and the work of Dino and some of the guys going to Point-to-One every year actually forced Apple into, how much credit do you give to Point-to-One for dragging Apple along and, adding those mitigations, adding those roadblocks to where we are today, where it's a lot more difficult to show up at Point-to-One with a single vulnerability and a single exploit and pop the entire machine, right? You need chains.
Need chains for sure. The thing about Pondon that's interesting is, yes, you can sit here and say it's gotten harder, and it has, I think. But if you look at like the data of Pondon, every year someone does it. So,
right.
If you're looking at the binary data of can a computer get hacked at Pondon, the answer has been yes for 20 years, and that hasn't ever changed. And so that's kind of an interesting thing that it's hard to measure how much harder it is when that is. And maybe you can use the money in Pondon as a measurement right. of some kind, but if you measure based on success, then there's been no progress. But back to your original question about how much impact.
Fair. But that's not fair, though, that there's been no change if you measure it based on success, because okay, let's get into that little portion there. If it's so much harder, that it requires teams and chains and the prices are so much higher, why is it still successful?
Well, it's possible, of course. Whether today or in 10 years, you're going to be able to hack into a computer and a web browser. So it's possible. And then why do people do it? I guess, for the prize money, for the fame, for their resume. I don't know. So as long as you hang that carrot out there, people are going to go for it. Mm-hmm. And it's possible. So they're going to succeed most of the time. And so far, all the time.
Right. And as an industry, you guys, the experts, said, stop looking for bugs and stop focusing on bugs and try to limit exploitation, try to reduce exposure to exploitation, reduce attack surfaces here and there. Do you think that as an industry from 2007, 8, 9, those years to today, we've moved in the direction we needed to move with the right set of mitigations and the right set of investments in security, or would you have preferred we had gone in certain different directions? How do you look at the evolution of security on platforms, not only Apple, but Windows and so on, and based on your previous advice that we should be focusing on limiting the power of exploits?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. So for a while, I believed the opposite. So I was a big proponent of find all the bugs. And right. Then at some point, I changed my mind. So at some point, I realized that, you can find a lot of the bugs, but you're never going to find all the bugs. And I think I underestimated how many vulnerabilities there are in software. And once I kind of got a better handle on that, I was like, oh, this is not a solution. So,
and that's still the most realistic approach to it, right?
Yeah, you're not going to write perfect software, period. So what you have to worry about then is, like you mentioned, so minimizing attack surface. So you can eliminate huge classes of bugs or huge groups of bugs by not even having the code in your product anymore. Of course, you still need a web browser. It still needs to parse images and videos and stuff. So right. You can never eliminate everything, but you can do that. And then you try to make, then you say this browser, this piece of software is going to get exploited. Then what? I don't want to lose everything then. So then you make it to where Chrome, I don't know, I haven't kept up on this in a while, but for a while, Chrome had a sandbox that said you could read files, but you couldn't write files. And so then you could read stuff, but you're not going to really be able to persist because you can't write any files. And so you use sandboxes, you make things hard. You hopefully have some detection in there to where I give up. You're going to attack me someday and succeed, but I'm going to know it. And then I'm going to be able to do something about it. And so that's kind of the kind of holistic approach I think you need to take, because just saying I'm going to find all the bugs is not really
and on the reduction solution. Right, and on the reduction of attack surface space, we've got a most recent example is lockdown mode. Have you gotten a chance to play with it? What are your thoughts on what lockdown mode represents?
No, I'm a bad practitioner of security. So I like, security is a trade-off between things are easy in work and things that are secure. And in my personal life, I just choose to make things work. Life's hard enough without my computer.
So you haven't looked at lockdown mode at all?
Mm-mm.
Do you expect it to be game changing though, just from a technical perspective with the kind of attack surface reductions it has done? Do you expect success from that to address what it's meant to address?
I mean, what's success? So if your customer of lockdown mode is, the president of the United States or a CEO of some high tech company, then no, you're still going to be able to attack those guys. And if your customer is me, just some guy, then
right.
You probably don't need it because, my iPhone's pretty secure unless you're one of
right.
these few people who can spend 6 months working on an exploit. And why are you going to waste it on me? So I don't really
right.
get what it's supposed to solve. It doesn't make your phone 100% secure. That's for sure. And,
right. And it's meant to address targets from those adversaries that are fully well resourced. I mean, it's NSO and Pegasus and those types of guys. Do you think that when you say the victims of those guys are still going to be popped, you're saying lockdown mode, you're not expecting lockdown mode to have a significant effect on that part? I
mean, it's going to cost them more money and resources, but I don't think they're going to be like, we can't hack that. It's impossible. So I think it might cost them a little more money to do it, but I have no, I wouldn't feel comfortable having that and that mode and expecting not to get hacked and putting my life on the line, and having that be the only defense that I'm counting on. I wouldn't count on that for sure.
Just to close the loop on the Apple thing, how would you rate the security posture of the MacBook and the iPhone today?
I mean, it's a hell of a lot better than 10 years ago. No, it's pretty
and
good.
You're still...
Yeah, I'm talking to you on a Mac right now. I have an iPhone in my pocket, so I still use it. I've used it forever. I think they're pretty good. You mentioned phone donor earlier. I did it 4 years, and eventually I stopped doing it because it was too hard. So, and that was a long time ago, right? That was 2012, 10 years ago. It was too hard for me. So
when did it become too hard?
Then
what made it too hard?
It's gotten harder since then even, but at the time it was fewer vulnerabilities. They reduced their attack surface. They have ASL or DEP. So, and at some point I'm sure they had sandboxing or whatever. That was, past my days, but for me, it's not fun to work in a group of 10 people, hacking.
Right.
It's fun to work with a buddy or, by yourself or whatever. Once you got 10 people, it's a job. It's not
right. It's not fun anymore.
Right.
And at some point, the dynamics changed from, like we just mentioned, from one vulnerability and one exploit, it went to you needed 3 or 4 vulnerabilities to get root and do additional things.
You need information disclosure bugs, which I suck at finding. And so there was just things that were kind of, I did it. It was never my job. I never really made any money on it. And so it was just something that I would do in my spare time. And it got to the point that it wasn't fun enough to do in my spare time.
And then you pivoted to mobile, and you might have the distinction for all we know of being the only security researcher to be banned from both app stores. Could you talk a little bit about the Apple work and the Android work that caused that?
Sure. So my humble brag is I was the first one to hack an iPhone, first one to hack an Android phone when they came out a million years ago. But what you're talking about is for the iPhone. The way iPhones work is they have code signing, and that's what makes it to where you can only download apps from the App Store and not just from some random website. And that's one of the things that makes it really secure. And secure in the sense that you're not going to have malware running crazy on your phone because it had to go through the App Store. And part of going through the App Store is Apple reviews it before they put it there. So if it was doing something super bad, they wouldn't put it there. Anyway, I found a flaw a while ago. Hopefully you know the year. I don't. Where
2011
iPhone
and iPad. Yeah.
Okay. So I found a flaw where you could have an app that could download code that hadn't been signed and hadn't been checked by Apple and run it. So that violates their basic security principle around code signing. And of course I was going to report this to Apple because I always report on my bugs to Apple. And Apple never pays me or anything like that. I never have gotten a bug bounty from them. I just did it for fun. And one of the things I knew was going to happen, because at this point, Apple already knew who I was pretty well, because I'd reported a bunch of bugs to them in the past.
But you had created an app to demo it, a harmless app. I think it was like stock quotes or something. It was like it allowed you to manipulate some data there, right?
So the deal was, I was afraid that if I reported to them the bug that there's this code signing flaw and that you could have in an app, that they would say, "Oh, well, if you submitted that, we would have caught it. So there's no way that that vulnerability would ever be exposed in the real world." And so, in a preemptive move, I created an app that did take advantage of that vulnerability, only if I made it so, if some random guy downloaded my app, it wouldn't do it. I had to trigger it. And so anyway, and I put the app in through the App Store review process. It passed. So it was in the App Store for like months, and then I reported the bug to them, and they fixed it. But they got mad. So like the story is, I was out like jogging one day. I came home and my wife's like, "Oh, Apple called you," and I was like, "Apple doesn't call me. Never in my life. It's not like a common thing for a multi-billion-dollar corporation to give you a ring." So right. I knew something was up. And it turned out that was the day that the like news report or whatever had come out about this bug in the app and all that stuff. And so anyway, they were mad about the app being in the App Store because it had this security critical vulnerability in it or whatever. And so they and to punish me, I guess, they told me I couldn't. They kicked me out of the developer program for a year, for at least a year, they said. Right. So then I couldn't write apps anymore. The only reason it kind of affected me a little bit was I couldn't before that I could download as part of that program like beta releases of Apple OS, right. So I could like check out my exploits were working or not, or if they had fixed them. So that was kind of a bummer. But anyway, I contacted them after a year and I was like, "Hey, it's been a year. Like, can I get back in this program?" And they just didn't respond to the email. So as far as I know,
so you assume you've been banned for life.
I guess I'm banned forever. I don't know.
And then, the Android App Store, you also had an incident with the Android App Store. What caused that bad?
Yeah, that one was me and John Override did some research into their thing called Bouncer. I don't know if they still have this thing, but it was the way, like, again, they have a review process for apps you develop. But I guess they do it all, or at least a big part of theirs was automatic. So like you would take an app, they would run it in an emulator, make sure that it didn't do anything too crazy. And if it was fine, they would put it in the store. And so we were doing some research on like how that thing works and how you could fingerprint that. So like, could your app like act nicely when it's an emulator and then on a real phone, be malicious or whatever. But they ended up, the like super crazy thing about this was I never published an app ever with them because you could just put it up there. They would review it and then you had to hit publish. And I just never published one. And so they kicked me out because I never published one, but John had published some and he got kicked out because of that. Then they kicked me out because my account was associated with his account. And so I was like, this is so absurd. And then I was like, but at the same time, if I'm associated with John, like I'm probably pretty dirty. So it's probably fine to kick me out. So yeah, they kicked me out and they straight up said it was a lifetime ban. So I will never be able to make a career writing apps. They've made sure.
In either of the two app stores.
No, unless Nokia comes back or something, I'm pretty much out of luck.
In your research years, what would you say? And I've asked you this during the Point1 years, but I'm looking at it from a more wider lens. What do you say you're better at? Finding vulnerabilities and fuzzing and looking for crashes and finding exploitable paths, or writing exploits? And the flip side to that is which is easier and which is harder?
As far as these are harder, I think it depends on the person. But for me, I'm 100% better at finding bugs. Like I can find bugs. I like finding bugs. It's interesting to me. Writing exploits is just something I do just to prove that bugs are real. Like I don't like it. But it's sort of part of the job or whatever. So, yeah, I'm good at finding bugs. I think I've liked finding bugs, since I was, NSA. Like
what makes you good? What makes someone good at finding bugs? What is there a mental approach? Is there a luck component to it? Is there a framework that works for everyone? Give me a sense of.
I will say like the reason I like it is it's usually like it's really hard and there's tons of code and all this, but at the end it usually boils down to like 2 lines and you're like, look how stupid they were. They made this mistake, right? That's the thing I think is so fun about it. Is it looks easy. It's like magic. It looks easy. I mean, but it's hard, right? And so anyway, but as far as what it takes to be good at it, like for one thing, you have to be patient and not give up. So you're probably not going to find a bug in a day or a week sometimes, and like I've looked for weeks without finding any bugs, and that's just part of it. And people ask if I use math, my PhD in math ever. No, is the answer to that. Except working 3 years on a math problem teaches you that you can't solve everything in a day, and I think I kind of use that there. But no, I think a big part of finding bugs is looking in the right place. So, look at code that is either like super brand new or super old that nobody uses, but it's still there. And, a lot of my success has been, especially recently or more recently, is in like newer type products. So it's like, oh, these, like I'm not looking at core Windows for bugs because that's been audited by 1 billion people. So it's like, oh, like, if you want to talk about cars or, batteries or whatever, like no one probably looked at this in a long time or ever. And so I've always trying to look at something that's easier.
You're more likely to have implementation errors there and some other things that pop up bugs, right? Dino also talks about blood in the water. Is that an approach you take where you know that this component of code has always been problematic and you're more likely to find something there?
Yeah, that's an approach for sure. That's like kind of the opposite of what I do. I try to look where no one else is looking. So
interesting.
There's different ways and different people find different bugs. And, even when I was a consultant or at my day job now, like I never look for bugs by myself, like, cause it's just, there's some bugs I'm going to find and there's some that due to whatever biases I have or whatever, I'm never going to find. And so it always takes more than one set of eyes, I think, if you want to know what's going on.
I asked this of Nico Weisman and some of your peers in the exploit writing world, and it's something that's just, fascinating and interesting to me. Maybe it'll bore the audience, but what does it feel like emotionally when you pop the piece of software and you get your exploit to run super cleanly? Is that something you're clicking and running it over and over just for the thrill of it? Like, what does that feel like? What does that feel like at the visceral level, finding and realizing that you have this kind of power?
It feels good, but at the same time, like, it's like days, or at least for me, because I'm slow, it's days of like knowing this is going to work and then it finally does. So it's like relief, like finally that thing worked. I knew it was going to work. It just finally did. So like, people wonder like, was I excited when I hacked the Jeep the first time? It's like, yes, except it was like months of, micro progress. And so it was like that final day was, step 1,000.
Relief more than thrill, right?
Right. I had already done 999 steps and that was step 1,000. So like, yeah, it was cool, but I'd known for months it was going to work. It was just a matter of like, trudging down the trail until I got there. That's how a lot of it is like writing exploits is for me.
I feel like we're rushing through all of your, like your history and your accomplishments.
Yeah, man, stop downplaying all my cool stuff. I was hacking stuff all day, man. You're not giving me no credit.
There was the work with Colin Moliner in 2009 around the SMS processing bug, which I believe you tested on an iPhone of mine that I still have, the old original iPhone of mine that I still have.
Yeah, Colin's my coworker now. I still hang out with him. And so that one, it was, you could send a text message and take over an iPhone, which no one had done at that point. Yeah. Now it's like, with Natalie and stuff, like they're finding all sorts of bugs in SMS.
Right. That was the original zero click, right? The original zero click. You gave me you sent me an SMS. I clicked on a link and you had my contact database on your machine. It was like eye-opening to me at the time.
Yeah. I mean, it was magic, right? So you could, all I needed was your phone number. I didn't need you to click anything. So that was nice. Right. Didn't even need to know your email or nothing. So I could send you a text message on your iPhone and take it over, which was like a pretty cool bug. Pretty cool.
How did you choose your targets? Because I feel like there's a little bit of the media game you were playing as well, going after those things that were going to, create headlines, drum up publicity. You talked about educating the audience and so on. Because you did battery hacking as well. Mm-hmm. I think there was another one that I'm forgetting. You did the Apple battery hack. NFC stuff before the car stuff. How did you pick your targets?
Yeah, I mean, the NFC thing was interesting too. But yeah, I was like, just stuff that interests me. So like, I did basically web browsers forever because that's kind of the most, ripe for the picking. But then I was like, I got sick of that. And I was like, what kind of things can I attack that are not that are, that are different or unique in some way. And I was like, oh, it'd be cool if you could send a text message and hack a phone. And so that's what I did.
Right.
And
just the intellectual curiosity and just the fascination with trying being able to do that.
Yeah, back in that time is when I hacked Second Life too, which was like
right. Talk to me. I remember that was a fun exploit as well.
Yeah, that was a good one. So for people who are too young to know what Second Life is, it was like this thing that like Facebook's metaverse or whatever they're trying to do. But so you could. I worked with Dino on this one too. So you could create an object in Second Life, just like and in this case it was like a box. Right. And if your like avatar got too close to the box, I would take over your avatar and your computer. And so it was sort of interesting that to me, that was interesting because it's like, oh, it's like a physical, creation
type. Yeah.
Right. It's a creation in the real world, in the, quote virtual world of the exploit. Like the exploit was a thing. And yeah, that was zero click too. You just walk by it and it would exploit you. And then you didn't, for a long time, I thought you had to like see the box. But it turned out the box, like your computer doesn't have eyeballs. So like you could just bury the box underground, and if you still walked over it, the computer processed it and you would exploit you. So very interesting stuff, I thought.
Didn't the demo include some audio file? I don't know. Maybe my memory is fading, but I remember the demo of that exploit might have had some fun component to it.
There was one, you might be talking about this. So back then, apparently I was braver than I am now. Me and Dino were giving a talk at ShmooCon, and we were demoing the exploit live in front of everybody in Second Life. And at the time, we had reported the bug to Linden Labs, is the name of the company. But it's a virtual world. Anyone can show up virtually if they want to. And some Linden Labs employee showed up with like a little protest picket sign that was walking around while we were doing the demo. I was like, this is so wild. I was like, I guess we'll still just do it anyway, even though there's a guy, protesting the exploit, but, fix it if you don't want us to live demo our exploit.
Just going back to that time, I'm closing the loop on it. There was a famous picture of Alex Sadirov and Dino Daizovi on stage at CanSec West with the cardboard "No More Free Bug" sign. You were part of that. I won't call it a movement, but you were part of that group of guys at the time who were objecting to giving finding bugs and giving it to vendors who were not only sleeping on them and taking a long time to patch them, but and would blame researchers for irresponsible disclosure and all that stuff. What was the motivation for No More Free Bugs, and what was the idea there, and how has it evolved to today with what we are seeing around bug bounty programs and all that stuff?
Man, anyone who listens to this is going to have no idea. We're skipping all over the place. It's crazy.
I know.
So No More Free Bugs was something that me, Alex, and Dino came up with at CanSec West. They're famous for holding the sign. I was actually on stage talking about it, doing the intellectual power work while they're just standing there. But yeah, the idea was, I've reported tens of bugs, maybe 100 bugs to companies over, my career, and they hadn't given me anything. So we're working really hard and the results is that the products are being more secure, and companies weren't, and sometimes companies, not only were they not giving us anything, they were downright hostile about it.
Openly hostile, right?
Right. And so the idea was just like, hey, it'd be nice to have some rules in place on how, we report bugs and, maybe make some money off it, since you pay the same person working for you to try to find these bugs. But when don't work for you, you don't pay me anything. And so the idea was just like, well, maybe we can hold these companies accountable for the way they interact with researchers by not providing bugs anymore. It's like, until you figure out a way to compensate us for this work, we won't give you any more bugs. So that was No More Free Bugs. And we did that for a while, for months, I guess. There was a bunch of people, who were participating in that, and it didn't work. So
this was but this was pre-bug bounty platforms. Before there were iDefense, VeriSign. There were a few, but it was before the booming of the bug bounty platform business.
Yeah, there weren't really any bug bounty platforms then, and so I mean, in some sense, first of all, I'm not going to take any credit for the way the industry moves.
People paying for bugs,
right? I didn't. The industry moves. I'm a drop in the ocean or the river, I guess is a better analogy. So. Yeah, maybe I moved it a millimeter.
But it was an important piece of the conversation at the time. The whole notion of vendors taking advantage of security researchers and the value of vulnerabilities, making products a lot better and making products a lot more expensive, and you guys were not being properly compensated for it. It was an important part of just a general conversation at the time.
It got people talking about it. There was news stories. Maybe there were people like companies who thought about it, but I like to say, for 9 months we didn't report any bugs. And companies, instead of coming begging for more bugs, were thrilled because they didn't have any security advisories during that time. So they're like, everyone from the outside thought that they were finally secure. And it's like the exact opposite of what really happened, which is hilarious to me.
And right after that, Google started buying bugs. Google started, coming to Point One as a sponsor and running their own Chrome Point One program. So at least in practice, the No More Free Bugs movement did resonate, and we started to see vendors starting to pay for things. So,
yeah, I mean, there are certainly bug bounties now in a lot of companies, and another thing that we really wanted, and one of the things bug bounties does provide, like formal bug bounties, is just rules of engagement. So it says like, here's the rules: you can submit a bug, and we won't prosecute you, we won't do anything. Here's the kind of bugs. Here's what you can do, and we're okay with it. Here's what you can't do, and we'll be mad at you. And that's really a big part of it too. It's just like, how can I know I can report this bug without getting in trouble? And so that's a big part of bug bounties. That is a nice benefit. Even if the money's not enough, like I couldn't live off of my bug bounty fines, but at least I know that I'm not going to go to jail, and that's something.
And then in 2014, you pivoted to cars. 2014 is when it publicly, when the work became publicly known. What was the idea? Why automobiles?
Well, it was interesting. I mean, I thought it was cool that, I had, like I mentioned before, I like to write exploits. I like to find bugs. I like to know how things work. And there's nothing that's computerized that's bigger than a car that I own, right? I don't own a satellite or a tank or anything. The biggest computer I own is in my car. And, it's also like, back to like the Second Life and the SMS thing. It's like, I like to be able to show, like, I like to pretend like, hey, if I'm talking to my grandma and she wants to know what I do, I need a way to explain that
demonstrate
to her.
Right.
And say like, oh, I hack web browsers and I can read your mail. It's kind of like, she doesn't really know what the hell I'm talking about.
Right.
But if I say like, hey, here's a video of Andy Greenberg driving down the road and I can turn a steering wheel, like she's like terrified by that. And at least she can understand what it is. So for me, it was appealing because you could physically demonstrate it. It had safety implications, so it was hopefully helping people be safer. It was, I thought it'd be pretty easy because no one had probably really looked at it. One group had, but like in my particular chosen car, probably no one had ever looked at it outside of whoever worked there. And so I thought it wouldn't be too hard to find a bug.
Yeah, you mentioned one other person there was some. What was the car hacking scene at the time? Were you guys pioneering this, or were you trying to piggyback on some prior work around? Yeah,
so around the time frame of like 2012, there was some academic group that was working on this, and they hacked an Impala. They were able to remotely hack into the car from anywhere, and they could control the brakes. And so that was kind of. And they had two papers, one that was kind of like our first paper, which was just only like if you were internal to the car, and then a second one that showed different ways you could wirelessly attack the car. And their papers were great, super thorough. And that's what we based all our research on. At the time, that was the only paper about it. So there's still not that many papers about it. But so I read that paper probably 20 times, both those papers. And those people did. Like I might have I heard about it through someone talking about their paper. So if that paper didn't exist, we may have never done any research because it's such a novel idea to even think you could hack a car. Like I don't think I could have come up with it on my own. So read the paper, it was great. And then that gave us the idea. It's like, hey, we should get into this. It's kind of cool. And some of the things we did, like they basically did everything, like no click, remote, car, control it, right? So they did end to end everything you could do. So some of the things we wanted to do that was a little bit different than that, me and Chris Valsek, was for one thing, we were going to be more open. So they were very scared to release anything for fear that someone would do something bad with it. But the bad thing about that is like, it was really hard for folks like me to learn like how to do anything. Because so we wanted to release all our tools, be very, very transparent. The other thing is the cars had come along a long way from the 2010 car, whatever they were looking at. So they could do brakes. They could have probably done a lot more, but their car just couldn't do a lot more. So we made sure to take a car that had all the advanced features we could find. So it had lane keep assist, auto parking, so it could parallel park for you. It had the adaptive cruise control. So anyway, so there was a lot more computerized components, so we could do a lot more physically with the car. So that was the other kind of thing that made
lot more attack surfaces everywhere that we just discussed. This was just addition. All of those became addition of attack surfaces and new areas for you guys to go plant code, right?
Exactly.
This led to a massive recall. What was could talk a little bit about the outcome from this, and what was the research? So many questions around this Jeep research, because to do this kind of research, you actually have to go buy a vehicle. So there's a big, giant cost attached to it, even attempting this research. Can you talk about what was that cost like? Not just a monetary cost, but the cost of trying to put together this entire thing from scratch.
Yeah, so we were lucky, Chris and I, we did two different car hacking researches. The first one was I had a Ford, Chris had a Infiniti or something, I can't remember. No, he had Toyota.
This was prior to the Jeep work.
Yeah. This was in around 2013. And so, that research was funded by DARPA through Mudge's Cyber Fast Track grant. So that didn't actually cost us anything. We were able to get the cars, buy a bunch of tools. And the reason buying the tools was expensive was no one really talked about how to do it. So we didn't know what tools would work. So I'd have to buy 5 different things and hope one of them worked and stuff. So yeah, it was expensive. For me, it wasn't, because DARPA paid for everything. So that was nice.
Oh, okay.
When the Jeep came around, we needed a Jeep. Chris worked for a consulting company at the time. They bought us the Jeep. So it didn't cost me anything besides time and, I would wreck it. So I wrecked the Jeep with, when we were doing some of the videos, I had to pay to get a new radar put on it or something. I just paid out of pocket for that. And then with the Ford, one time I crashed into my garage on accident when I was hacking on it, and had to pay to get that fixed. So there are other things that you have to pay for besides just the car itself. But
the Jeep research was incredible because it affected braking, steering, acceleration. There's the famous video of the Wired video of you, Andy Greenberg, the journalist, driving in the car, and you guys controlling it remotely from a location far away from a laptop, and messing with him on the highway. You were criticized for that being a stunt hacking thing that put Andy in danger and all that stuff. Was there any worries at all on liability and all of that stuff?
So the reason we did that, first, let me say, is like we mentioned, the academic folks had already done basically the same thing, but they did it on a test track. Guys wearing a race car helmet and stuff, and you didn't really hear about it. I didn't hear about it at the time when they did the research, and I was a hacker dude, right? And so we wanted to really make it relatable. You're on a regular road, you're in a regular car, you're next to other cars. It's so that was a big part of it, was we wanted to make it to where people could associate oh, I get it. That's bad. That could happen to me. It's not just on some test track or something. And so there was some concern with it, but we tried to consider we could have turned the steering wheel or disengaged his brakes. I thought we kept it pretty safe. All we did was kill his engine, which happens to, I grew up with a pretty crappy car. It broke down all the time. And so it's a pretty daily
engine
occurrence.
On the road, it's not a big deal.
Exactly. So that was, we tried to do something that demonstrated it, but still kept it as safe as we could. And Andy knew it was. It's not like Andy was victimless.
Right.
He knew we were going to do it, so he had to know. Hopefully be prepared. And the main thing, if you watch the video, is I keep telling them don't panic. Right. That's the main thing. As long as you keep your cool, it's going to be fine. But if you start freaking out, then something bad could happen. So that was the main message I tried to get to him.
And was this live demo not responsible, but was this live demo necessary for Jeep to take it seriously? What was the disclosure process with working with Jeep to get these issues reported to them?
Yeah, we reported these vulnerabilities to Fiat Chrysler something like 7 months before Black Hat. We told them hey, we're going to talk about it at Black Hat. Here's the deal. And we reported it to them before we even knew the full effects. We just knew that there was a vulnerability that led us to something. And so as time went on, we kept reporting more information to them about when we found more stuff. But And whether it was necessary to get it fixed, and who knows. But the one thing I will say is the day. So they had known for 7 months, and they did the recall like 2 days after the Andy Greenberg story came out. So right. Maybe they were always planning on doing that, but I tend to think that definitely got some attention to them to be a little faster.
Car security and
who knows? That's always it's always a debate how you report things. We just tried to give as much time as possible to people and let them to do the right thing.
Has things gotten better in the car security work? In the car security work, not necessarily on affecting braking, steering, acceleration, and all of that stuff, but in general, did your work change things around how things were designed? Did your work change things around how companies try to mitigate those things? What was the outcome outside of the recall? I mean, recall and that individual fix. Were there any structural things that was done?
I mean, it's hard
not
to
only
tell.
for Jeep, but generally.
Yeah, I mean, so it's tough because the automotive industry is pretty secretive. So, like Apple, which was secretive for years, now they write white papers on security. But you're not going to see, a Ford white paper on how they secure their ECUs. Like, just that's not really the culture of the auto industry. So it's pretty tough to tell what changes have been made. I hope that tons have. I know from just talking to at conferences, engineers from different car companies will come to me and say, "Oh, thanks for doing that research. Like that really got us more resources, or we were able to hire, or whatever." So like anecdotally, yes. If you look at like real data, like you can see some changes. So like the Jeep we hacked was a 2014 Jeep Cherokee. Sometime around 2018, they added in a new ECU to that line of cars that acted like a gateway or firewall, which would have made our attack like way harder. So like that stuff you can see from the outside, but like on the inside, like how they actually do things, it's really hard to tell. I hope that it's better. If they've had plenty of time to do it by now.
Do you worry that this cost that we talked about, if you want to do car hacking research, you have to go purchase a vehicle, or you have to have access to a vehicle, or get someone to purchase it for you? Do you worry that just this prohibitive cost of doing this research has limited the ability of researchers who may have the ability to do it but just can't do it, and we're kind of way behind because of this cost?
I mean, it's a concern, I guess, but I hope that the entire car industry isn't only secure because researchers aren't looking. Right,
but like, it's been proven that third-party research drives a lot of this. I mean, we just had a 1-hour discussion of how all the work you guys did went into mitigations on Windows and Mac platforms. You would have to believe that a lot of public research, public publications would put some pressure on these guys. And if there aren't more teams, like how many folks are doing public research on car hacking nowadays? Team Keen and maybe 2 others, right?
Yeah, not many people, unfortunately.
Shouldn't that be 25 teams based on the talent that we have in this?
I mean, I think maybe you're giving security researchers too much credit. So like what made Apple or Microsoft or whoever change? Was it pwn to own, or was it actual malware that was, costing their customers money? And so like maybe the reason you don't see a ton of car security research is because cars aren't getting hacked. And so like there's not. Right.
I'm arguing that cars aren't getting hacked because guys don't have the ability or the resources to go.
I mean, like guys like me, I'm saying hacked in like a malicious way. So
right, okay.
You don't see cars getting crashed every day because of cyber attacks. And if you did, then maybe there'd be more researchers willing to, pay the money to get a car to do the research. But because it's like, well, it's like this thing that's not even happening. Maybe that is as much a detriment as the cost.
Does your philosophy change? Does your security philosophy change as you go to automobiles and cars? Let me just frame it this way. On Windows, Microsoft has adopted this assume breach as a philosophy. You assume breach and you do detection and response. I'm guessing that in the car world, you can't really assume breach and deal with detection and response because the dangers associated with an actual breach or an actual compromise would be much higher. How does your thinking? How do you manage your thinking around just like a philosophy of protecting this car?
Well, you're wrong, Ryan.
Okay.
So you can do it.
Fair
So
enough.
right. So think about the G-Pack. So we attacked the head unit, and then we attacked the CAN controller, and then we were able to send messages to the brakes. If when we attacked the head unit, that was detected, and you shut off the head unit, then you win, right? Or you disable the CAN traffic. You put the car in a safe mode or something. So there's definitely it's going to be a chain of attacks, even against a car. And if you can stop that chain before it reaches the end, I always said, if all I could do is hack a car and change the radio station, that's a win. Because who cares, right? It's bad, but it's not like turning the steering wheel bad. So there is a time between the ability to turn the radio station and the ability to control the steering where you can do detection and response. And so that is, it's not the only thing you want to be doing, but it's certainly an important thing that car companies can do to make security better for their vehicles.
I want to use the Tesla as an example, because if you buy a Tesla 3 years ago, today it's a better car because of software updates coming down the pike, right? And every time a software update comes, you click accept and you run it, kind of just trusting these updates entirely. How worried should I be when I hit that apply this update around the ability of someone to push a malicious update to my car to do dangerous things? Not necessarily Tesla, but cars in general. How difficult it is to do what you guys did with your braking, steering, acceleration, and all of that stuff?
I wouldn't be too worried. Tesla uses code signing and stuff. So what's coming down to you was approved by someone who has a key at Tesla, which probably isn't that many people. That can be bypassed and compromised. We've seen in the past that it's possible to get around these kinds of things. It's pretty rare. If you think about the whole world of exploits, very few have been through Microsoft Updater or something, right? That. I think it's happened, but if you compare this to the number of edge exploits, it's minuscule. So it's hard to mess that up, and it's hard to exploit that. So it's updating things securely is something that is pretty doable.
But that's the way remote exploits will be distributed if they're to be distributed, right? Through those firmware updating mechanisms.
Maybe. I don't know. We could have attacked all the cars that were vulnerable, the Jeep was vulnerable just through a cell phone interface. So that we wouldn't have done that through secure updates. We would have just attacked them all.
Right.
Maybe you could count our malware as an update, but
right.
So yes, there's you can attack cars directly, or you can attack them through their infrastructure. And you're describing kind of an infrastructure style attack, but there's other ways you could do that. But it's you're when you buy a Tesla, you're signing up for a software car, right?
Right.
So you probably, just like anything else, you probably want those features because there's new, better features coming down the pipe there, and you could just turn that off. Probably, I don't know if you can, but. If you're the person who buys a Tesla, you probably don't want to turn that off, because the reason you bought a Tesla is you like this new cool features and all the cool auto updates and stuff. And so
Cruise has a driverless fleet of cars out there, and you guys are pushing updates to it. How do you make sure the car isn't calling for somewhere else for a malicious update one, or how do you make sure there isn't the ability for someone to push it? Is there anything you can talk about how you guys address it?
We just do what you would do on any device. So almost all the car security is really just security, best security standards for anything else, right? So we use TLS and we check the certificate, so we know we're talking to the right thing. And then the updates we download are signed, and we have we can check the signature before we install it. And, we just the same sorts of, I'm not inventing new security on a daily basis.
The same mitigations.
I'm using the same technologies that everyone else uses. And I just make sure we do it right, and, trying not to make any mistakes.
Your buddy Chris Velasic is not here, but I want to put him on the spot because I suppose you guys talk every day. He said in automotive cybersecurity in 2022 is akin to where software security was around the time of the Bill Gates trustworthy computing memo. That sounds to me scary. It's how I don't want to ask you to tell me what was he talking about, but is there a fear that automakers today are still back in the early 2000s as it relates to security?
I think probably a better analogy would be that, Chris and I were the Bill Gates trustworthy security memo when we hacked the Jeep.
Right.
So that was the eye-opening event for car companies, I hope. And that is the thing that hopefully set them down the path to, putting the proper resources into securing their vehicles. So that's where I think we are today is if you want to say like 2015 was like whenever this, 2003 when Bill Gates or whoever did this, then I would say, yeah, but I hope by now to Bill Gates' credit, like that worked, right? That improved security greatly. Like the computer couldn't stay up for 5 seconds without getting hacked back before that. And so that was a big instigator in improving the security of the entire industry. And I don't want to take too much credit, but hopefully something similar happened when we did the car attack against the Jeep.
I'm running out of time, so I'll throw one last question to you. If you could throw out to security research community areas in automotive research that's ripe for eyeballs, like where would you point them? Like what intellectually, what are you more curious about pursuing as it relates to automotive security?
I think people should be looking at gateway modules of cars. And so a lot of the architectural security of cars relies on this gateway module, which separates things that talk to the internet from things that control the steering, right? And so a lot of the, at least high level security is built on this module that can stop traffic from transversing that way. And so, for example, like Tesla is literally the only one that has any research on it because that's who King Team likes to pick on.
Right.
And so there were some attacks early on, 2 years in a row, they were able to successfully bypass this gateway module and then control things like the brakes. And then at some point they stopped being able to do that. So now if you watch some of their more recent research is they get remote code running and then they don't ever get to the brakes. So they did that for the BMW i3 or whatever it was.
I see.
And so they were able, and then there was another one they did recently, the same thing. And so in both of those cases, the gateway module was able to stop them from doing like the super scary stuff. And so
there's still some work to do there.
Well, the car companies rely a lot on this module. Different companies have different modules, so you can't just look at one. Right. And I think it would warrant spending time, someone looking at that. Like if you can find a bypass in that, it would be pretty impactful.
So there's attack surface and blood in the water there?
Well, there's no blood in the water besides on the Tesla because no one looks at this stuff. But it's a really important piece of to the security puzzle. It does process data, so it would be a place that and like I mentioned, if Jeep would have had one of these, Chris and I probably wouldn't have been able to. There's a lot of things that like if they would have done X, Chris and I would not have been able to hack the Jeep, and this is one of those things.
Right. Let me let you out of here with this. Whenever I talk to people about driverless cars and the coming world of self-driving vehicles, the first thing that pops up is not me, safety, especially the layman. Like, I cannot trust this car to drive me. That mindset will probably change as we move forward. Today, would you recommend your mom getting into a driverless car and driving the streets of San Francisco? Is there a legitimate worry that there?
I mean, if you see my mom drive.
So
that's the thing is like everyone thinks they're a great driver, but I look around when I'm driving and a lot of people are terrible drivers. And so fair enough. I definitely wouldn't worry that she's going to be in a car that's going to get cyber attacked. I've been working, it's not perfect. There's, that could happen someday, but I've been working there 5 years and spent all that time making it hard. So it's going to be an impressive exploit if it ever happens. I'll tell you that. Yeah, I think it's, the car, self-driving cars are going to be safer than most drivers. And, they're going to, at least ours is going to be secure. So I don't know why you wouldn't want to take one. Plus, they're super cool.
I'll leave it right there. Thank you very much, Charlie. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's about time.
It's more than about time. Thank you very much.
Take care, buddy.